The stars flickered, then went silent. 8.2 billion voices, gone in a single breath. Earth didn't fall in war. It was erased. And the galaxy cheered as our home turned to ash. But in the cold void beyond Mars, 4 survivors watched the death of everything they loved and made a vow. They would not beg, they would not forget. They would become ghosts in the dark and remind the galaxy why humanity was feared. The day Earth fell. The warning came too late. By the time humanity's deep space monitoring stations detected the massive Zephyrian fleet approaching Earth's solar system, the die had already been cast. Admiral Thexlon, commander of the Collective's 3rd Extermination Fleet, watched through the bridge's crystalline viewport as the blue-green marble of Earth rotated peacefully below. Such a small world to cause so much trouble, he mused, his tentacles writhing with anticipation. The Zephyrian High Command had debated for cycles about the human problem. These bipedal creatures had spread to 17 star systems in less than 2 centuries, their aggressive expansion threatening the Collective's carefully maintained order. Marcus Steele pressed his eye against the mining ship's periscope, watching the alien vessels arrange themselves in perfect formation around Earth. The former Marine sniper had been working the asteroid belt for 3 years, trying to forget the wars that had cost him everything. His weathered hands gripped the scope tighter as he counted the ships. Too many, far too many. "Captain Rodriguez, you need to see this," Marcus called to the bridge. Elena Rodriguez floated down from the control deck, her dark hair drifting in the low gravity. The veteran pilot had seen her share of conflicts, but nothing like this. "What are we looking at, Marcus?" "Extinction," he replied quietly. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the laboratory section, her tablet showing readings that made no sense. The xenobiologist had dedicated her life to understanding alien species, but the energy signatures she was detecting defied everything she knew about physics. "Those ships are charging weapons unlike anything in our databases. The power levels are off the charts." Jake Morrison, the ship's engineer, pulled himself along the corridor using handholds. His coveralls were stained with grease and his red beard needed trimming, but his eyes were sharp with intelligence. "I've been monitoring their communications. It's not a language I recognize, but the patterns suggest coordinated military action." On Earth's surface, people went about their daily lives, unaware that death was already reaching for them. Children played in parks, lovers walked hand in hand, and scientists peered through telescopes trying to understand the strange ships that had appeared in their skies. The last normal day in human history was ending. The attack began at 1427 Universal Time. The first wave of plasma bombardment struck major population centers simultaneously. New York, London, Tokyo, Moscow, Mumbai, Sao Paulo. Within seconds, cities that had stood for centuries became columns of fire and ash. The second wave targeted military installations and spaceports, ensuring no organized resistance could form. Marcus watched through the scope as continents burned. The mining ship was positioned behind a large asteroid, hidden from the alien fleet's sensors, but close enough to witness humanity's final moments. His jaw clenched as he saw the lights going out across the night side of Earth, city by city, life by life. 8.2 billion souls, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "I can see the thermal signatures collapsing. They're not just destroying infrastructure, they're cooking the atmosphere." Elena's hands flew over the controls, trying to boost their communication array. "We need to warn the colonies. Mars, Europa, the outer stations, they have to know what's coming." But Jake shook his head grimly. "Look at the formation. They've got ships positioned at every jump point, every shipping lane. This isn't just an attack on Earth, it's the opening move in a complete extermination campaign." On the Zephyrian flagship, Admiral Thexlon received reports from his subordinates with satisfaction. The human homeworld's defenses had lasted exactly 18 minutes, longer than expected, but still pathetically brief. Their primitive fusion weapons had barely scratched the Collective's shield technology. "Sir, we're receiving surrender transmissions from the surviving human settlements," his communications officer reported. "Ignore them," Thexlon replied coldly. The High Command was very specific. No survivors, no prisoners. No evidence that humanity ever existed. The final bombardment lasted 6 hours. By its end, Earth's once blue oceans had boiled away. Its atmosphere was a toxic mix of superheated gases, and its surface glowed like a dying ember. The planet that had given birth to Shakespeare and Einstein, to jazz music and quantum mechanics, to dreams of touching the stars, was nothing more than a radioactive wasteland. Marcus never moved from the periscope during those 6 hours. He watched every moment, memorized every detail, burned every image into his mind. When it was over, when the last traces of his homeworld's atmosphere had been stripped away by the solar wind, he finally stepped back. "They made a mistake," he said quietly. "What?" Sarah looked up from her readings, tears streaming down her face. "They left witnesses." The Zephyrian fleet was already moving, heading toward the outer colonies to complete their genocide. But they had been sloppy, confident in their technological superiority. Their sensors were designed to detect large ships and energy signatures, not a single mining vessel hiding in the asteroid belt's debris field. Jake began working immediately, his engineering mind already planning their survival. The ship's life support could be extended if they rationed carefully. The mining equipment could be modified into weapons. Most importantly, they had samples of Zephyrian technology from a previous encounter, fragments that Sarah had been studying in her lab. "I've been analyzing their ship designs," Sarah said, pulling up holographic displays. "Their technology is impressive, but it's also specialized. They rely on energy shields and plasma weapons almost exclusively. They've never had to fight an enemy that could adapt quickly." Elena plotted courses on the navigation system, identifying hiding spots throughout the outer system. "We can use the gas giant's radiation to mask our signatures, plenty of moons and asteroid fields to hide in. But what's our endgame here? 4 humans against an entire galactic empire?" Marcus checked his rifle, a modified electromagnetic weapon that he'd customized over years of hunting in deep space. "We make them remember why they were afraid of us in the first place." The next few weeks were a blur of desperate preparation. Jake worked around the clock to modify their systems, incorporating Zephyrian technology wherever possible. Sarah studied the alien biosamples, looking for weaknesses in their physiology. Elena pushed their ship to its limits, moving from asteroid to asteroid, always staying one step ahead of the collective search patterns. Marcus planned. He studied their enemies' tactics, their ship designs, their communication protocols. Most importantly, he studied their psychology. The Zephyrians were a hive mind species, linked through quantum entanglement fields. They thought collectively, acted collectively, and made decisions collectively. This gave them incredible coordination, but it also made them predictable. Their first opportunity came 3 months after Earth's destruction. A Zephyrian patrol ship was investigating mining claims in the outer asteroid belt, its crew overconfident and careless. Marcus watched through the scope as the alien vessel approached their hiding spot, its sensors sweeping back and forth. "Range is 2.8 kilometers, he murmured into his comm. "Wind is, well, there's no wind in space, but gravitational effects are minimal. Wrench, is that electromagnetic pulse ready?" "Charged and standing by," Jake replied from the engineering section. "Their shields should go down for exactly 47 seconds once I trigger it." "Sarah, what about their crew?" "Zephyrians have a decentralized nervous system. A clean headshot won't necessarily be fatal, but it will sever their connection to the hive mind. They'll be confused, disoriented, vulnerable to follow-up attacks." Elena's voice came through the comm with steady professionalism. "Course locked. We'll have 1 pass, maybe 2 if we're lucky. After that, they'll call for backup." Marcus settled into his shooting position, the modified rifle's weight familiar in his hands. Through the scope, he could see the alien ship's bridge, its crew moving with the mechanical precision of a hive mind. He selected his target, the ship's commander, identifiable by the complex crest patterns on his carapace. "On my mark," Marcus said. 3, 2, 1, mark. Jake triggered the electromagnetic pulse. The Zephyrian ship's shields flickered and died. For exactly 47 seconds it was vulnerable. Marcus fired once. The projectile crossed the void between ships in 1.8 seconds, punching through the alien vessel's hull and striking the commander in what passed for his head. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The other crew members began moving erratically, their coordination broken. Elena brought their ship around for the killing blow. "Firing mining charges," she announced. The improvised weapon struck the crippled Zephyrian vessel amidships, tearing through its weakened hull. Atmosphere vented into space as the alien ship began to break apart, but they weren't done. Sarah had insisted on one final touch, a message for the survivors. As the Zephyrian crew struggled with their failing ship, their communication system received an unexpected transmission. It was an old Earth song, broadcast on all frequencies, "We shall overcome." The alien ship exploded 3 minutes later, but not before its automatic systems had recorded and transmitted the encounter. Somewhere in the depths of space, Zephyrian High Command received their first indication that the human problem had not been solved as thoroughly as they had believed. Marcus watched the debris scatter through space, feeling a grim satisfaction. 1 ship down. Approximately 10,000 to go. But for the first time since Earth's destruction, he allowed himself to hope. They had proven that the Zephyrians could be hurt, could be killed, could be made to fear. That was for Earth, he said quietly. In the depths of space, 4 humans began their impossible war against an empire that had never learned to fear the dark between the stars. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and presumed dead. But they had something the Zephyrians didn't understand: the human capacity for adaptation, for endurance, and for revenge. The galaxy was about to learn why humanity had spread to 17 star systems in less than 2 centuries. They were about to discover what happened when you cornered the most dangerous predator in the universe and gave it nothing left to lose. The Phantom War begins. 6 months after Earth's destruction, the Zephyrian collective faced a problem they had never encountered before. Ships were disappearing. Not just any ships, military vessels, supply convoys, even heavily escorted science expeditions. The attacks followed no pattern that their collective intelligence could decipher, struck without warning, and left no survivors to interrogate. Admiral Thexlon stood in the war room of the collective's regional command station, his tentacles writhing with frustration as he studied the holographic display. Red markers indicated 23 separate incidents across 4 star systems. The losses were becoming more than just an annoyance, they were affecting operational capacity. The attacks appear random, his tactical coordinator reported, her chitinous exoskeleton clicking as she manipulated the display. No strategic value to most targets. Supply freighters carrying food rations, scientific vessels studying gas giant atmospheres, even a diplomatic courier. The only connection is that they all traveled through sectors previously claimed by the extinct humans. Thexalon's compound eyes focused on the display. Not extinct, apparently. But 4 survivors cannot account for this level of activity. They must have allies we haven't identified. Light years away, Marcus Steele adjusted his scope and watched a Zephyrian supply convoy through the crosshairs. The alien ships moved in perfect formation, their shields shimmering like soap bubbles in the starlight. They had no idea death was already reaching for them. The mining ship had been transformed over the past months. Jake's engineering genius had turned their humble vessel into something unprecedented, a hybrid of human ingenuity and stolen Zephyrian technology. Stealth systems masked their energy signature, adaptive camouflage made them nearly invisible, and weapons systems cobbled together from a dozen different sources gave them firepower far exceeding their size. Convoy is maintaining standard formation, Elena reported from the pilot's station. 3 freighters, 2 escort frigates. I'm reading standard crew complements, approximately 40 Zephyrians total. Sarah's voice came through the comm from her laboratory. Biological weapon is ready for deployment. This batch is specifically engineered for their respiratory systems. Airborne, fast-acting, and untraceable after 12 hours. Marcus nodded, his weathered face calm despite the violence they were about to unleash. Jake, status on their shields? I've identified the harmonic frequency, the engineer replied, his fingers dancing across his modified control panel. 30-second window once I start the resonance cascade. Their defensive systems will interpret it as routine maintenance fluctuations until it's too late. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Jake would use their stolen Zephyrian technology to create microscopic fluctuations in the enemy shields, just enough to allow Sarah's biological weapon to penetrate their ship's atmosphere. The aliens would never know they had been attacked until they started dying. But Marcus had insisted on a personal touch. While the biological weapon would eliminate most of the crews, he wanted to send a message with his rifle. 1 shot, 1 kill, directly through the command ship's reinforced viewport, a signature that said humans were still fighting. Initiating shield resonance, Jake announced. Mark. The Zephyrian convoy continued on its course, unaware that their defensive systems were being quietly sabotaged. The microscopic fluctuations in their shield matrices created tiny gaps, invisible to their sensors but large enough for Sarah's weaponized spores to slip through. Marcus lined up his shot on the convoy commander, visible through the transparent aluminum of the command ship's bridge. The alien was reviewing shipping manifests, probably planning the distribution of supplies to colonies that had once been human worlds. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Biological payload deployed, Sarah reported. Estimated effect time, 4 minutes. Marcus waited, his breathing steady and controlled. Through his scope, he watched the first signs of the weapon taking effect. Crew members began moving erratically, their coordinated hive mind behavior breaking down as their nervous systems failed. The convoy's perfect formation started to drift as pilots lost consciousness at their controls. Now, Marcus whispered and squeezed the trigger. The projectile crossed 3 kilometers of void in 2.1 seconds, punching through the command ship's viewport and striking the convoy commander directly in the center of his cranial ridge. The alien's body jerked once, then went still, his connection to the collective severed permanently. Within minutes, all 40 Zephyrians were dead, their ships drifting powerless in the black between stars. But Marcus wasn't finished. He had Jake hack into the convoy's communication systems and broadcast a message on all collective frequencies. A recording of Earth's final transmission, the last words spoken by humanity's leaders before the bombardment began. "This is for our children," the recording said, the voices of Earth's representatives echoing across space. "Remember us. Remember what you took. We will not go quietly into that dark night." The message would reach Zephyrian Command within hours, another piece of evidence that their genocide had been incomplete. More importantly, it would spread fear throughout their ranks. The collective's greatest strength was their hive mind coordination, but fear was an individual emotion. It created cracks in their unity, made them question their collective decisions. 3 weeks later, the pattern began to emerge. The attacks weren't random, they were psychological warfare on a galactic scale. Every strike was documented and broadcast across the collective's networks. Every death was personal, intimate, showing the aliens that nowhere was safe from human vengeance. Marcus had become something more than a sniper in those months. Studying captured Zephyrian technology, he had learned to modify their own weapons against them. His rifle now fired projectiles that could punch through their advanced armor, guided by targeting systems that used their own sensor networks to track them. He had become the perfect predator for hunting Zephyrians. But it was Sarah who provided the truly devastating weapons. Her knowledge of xenobiology, combined with samples taken from their victims, allowed her to create targeted bioweapons that affected only Zephyrian physiology, viruses that attacked their neural implants, bacteria that consumed their exoskeleton material, fungal spores that disrupted their quantum entanglement fields. Jake's contributions were subtler, but equally important. He had learned to think like the Zephyrian machines, understanding their technology well enough to turn it against them. Every ship they captured provided new components to improve their own vessel, new software to hack their networks, new weapons to add to their arsenal. Elena held them all together, her leadership keeping them focused when the enormity of their task threatened to overwhelm them. She had become more than just a pilot. She was their strategist, their coordinator, their anchor to humanity in the endless dark between stars. The collective's response was predictable and brutal. They increased patrols in the affected sectors, implemented new security protocols, and began executing suspected collaborators among the client species they ruled. But their actions only served to create more enemies, more potential allies for the human survivors. It was during an attack on a Zephyrian research station that they made their most important discovery. The facility was studying captured alien species, trying to understand the psychology of resistance movements. Among the prisoners, they found a delegation of Kythera, silicon-based life forms whose homeworld had been conquered by the collective decades earlier. The rescue was messy and desperate. Sarah's biological weapons were useless against silicon-based physiology, so they had to rely on conventional tactics. Marcus provided overwatch from long range while Elena and Jake infiltrated the station directly. The firefight lasted 27 minutes and left the research facility in ruins, but they managed to extract 6 Kytheran survivors. The implications were staggering. If other species were willing to fight the collective, if they could be organized and coordinated, then the impossible war might actually be winnable. The humans weren't alone in their desire for freedom. Commander Zix of the liberated Kytherans was ancient even by his people's standards, his crystalline body bearing the scars of decades of resistance. When he learned that 4 humans had been waging a successful guerrilla campaign against the collective, his optical sensors flickered with something that might have been hope. "Your species' reputation preceded its destruction," he told them during their first strategic meeting. "The collective feared human expansion because you were unpredictable, adaptive, dangerous. They thought destroying your homeworld would eliminate that threat. They were wrong." Marcus studied the star charts Zix had provided, noting the locations of other subjugated worlds, resistance cells, potential allies. "How many species are under collective control?" 47 confirmed, possibly more. Most have accepted their subjugation, but some still remember freedom. The Kythera, the Vorthan Empire, the crystalline communes, the hive breakers of Andromeda Minor, all waiting for someone to light the spark of rebellion. Sarah leaned forward, her scientific mind already working on the possibilities. Their hive mind gives them coordination, but it also makes them vulnerable to cascade failures. If we could disrupt the quantum entanglement fields that link them, Jake nodded enthusiastically. "I've been studying their network architecture. It's incredibly sophisticated, but it relies on central nodes for coordination. Take out the right targets, and you could fragment their entire command structure. Elena plotted courses to the nearest resistance worlds, calculating fuel consumption and travel times. We'll need more than 4 people to pull this off. We'll need an army. Marcus checked his rifle, the weapon that had become the symbol of human resistance throughout the galaxy. Then we'll build one. One shot, one ship, one world at a time. The war was about to change. What had begun as a desperate quest for revenge was becoming something greater. A liberation movement that could free the galaxy from collective tyranny. The Zephyrians had awakened something they didn't understand when they destroyed Earth. They had created the very thing they feared most, humans with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. In the months that followed, the phantom attacks intensified. But now they were coordinated with uprisings on conquered worlds, strikes against key infrastructure, and propaganda campaigns that spread hope among the oppressed species of the galaxy. The 4 survivors of Earth had become the catalyst for something unprecedented in galactic history, a unified resistance movement. Admiral Thexelon received the reports with growing alarm. The attacks were no longer random or limited to former human space. They were systematic, strategic, and growing in scope and effectiveness. Worse, they were inspiring copycat attacks throughout the collective's territories. "Sir," his intelligence coordinator reported, "we're receiving confirmation of coordinated attacks in 7 different sectors. The humans appear to have formed alliances with at least 4 different resistance groups. Their tactical capabilities have increased exponentially." Thexelon's tentacles writhed with barely controlled fury. "Impossible. 4 primitives cannot orchestrate this level of rebellion." But even as he spoke, he knew it was true. The humans had done the unthinkable. They had united the galaxies dispossessed against the collective's rule. The war that had begun with Earth's destruction was entering a new phase, and for the first time in his long military career, Admiral Thexelon felt something he had never experienced before: uncertainty. In the darkness between stars, 4 humans and their growing alliance of liberated worlds prepared for the next phase of their impossible war. They had proven that the collective could be hurt, could be fought, could be defeated. Now it was time to prove that they could be destroyed. Empire's End. The siege of Nexus Prime began not with warships, but with a song. As the combined Liberation fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Zephyrian capital system, every communication channel was flooded with the same transmission: Earth's final broadcast, the voices of humanity's leaders speaking words of defiance, even as their world died beneath them. "This is for our children," the recording echoed across space, reaching every ship, every station, every settlement in the system. "Remember us, remember what you took. We will not go quietly into that dark night." Emperor Vexthal felt something he had never experienced in his 3 centuries of existence: fear. The sensation was alien to his hive mind consciousness, creating discord in the quantum fields that connected every Zephyrian in the Empire. From his crystalline palace in the heart of Nexus Prime, he could sense the confusion spreading through his people like a virus. The Liberation fleet was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human survivors commanded ships crewed by a dozen different species. Kythera crystal ships flew alongside Vorthon dreadnoughts, their crews united by shared hatred of collective oppression. At the fleet's heart was the modified mining vessel that had started it all, its hull scarred by countless battles but its crew unbowed by 2 years of impossible war. Marcus Steele stood in what had once been the ship's cargo bay, now converted into a strategic command center. Holographic displays showed the disposition of forces around Nexus Prime, the massive orbital defenses that protected the collective's homeworld, the fleet positions that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. "They're scared," he observed, watching Zephyrian ships maintain defensive formations instead of their usual aggressive stance. "Good. Fear makes them predictable." Sarah Chen worked at a bank of monitors, her fingers dancing across controls that monitored biological weapons deployment throughout the system. Over 2 years of war, she had become the galaxy's foremost expert in anti-Zephyrian warfare, her creations responsible for the deaths of thousands of their enemies. "Neural Disruptor is ready for wide-area deployment," she reported. "If I can get close enough to their communication nodes, I can sever the quantum entanglement fields that link their hive mind. They'll lose coordination for approximately 6 hours. Jake Morrison's voice came through the comm from the engine room, where he was making final adjustments to their most ambitious modification yet. "Quantum resonance amplifier is online. Marcus, when you take your shot at the Emperor, this beauty will broadcast the quantum signature across their entire network. Every Zephyrian in the Empire will feel him die. Elena Rodriguez studied the tactical displays with the cold professionalism that had kept them alive for 2 years. The palace is heavily shielded, but I've identified a flight path that should get us within range. It'll be a one-way trip unless Jake can get those stolen jump engines working. Have I ever let you down? Jake replied with forced cheerfulness. Don't answer that, Marcus said quietly. He checked his rifle for the 1000th time, the weapon that had become legend throughout the galaxy. Modified with Zephyrian targeting systems, Kythera crystal focusing arrays, and Vorthan power cores, it was perhaps the most advanced small arms weapon ever created. The battle for Nexus Prime began with surgical strikes against the orbital defense platforms. Resistance fighters who had infiltrated the stations months earlier activated hidden explosives, creating gaps in the defensive network. Liberation fleet ships poured through these openings, their crews shouting battle cries in 40 different languages. But the real war was being fought in dimensions the organic species could barely comprehend. Sarah's biological weapons spread through the collective's hive mind networks, creating chaos in their quantum communications. Entire fleets lost coordination as their crews fell victim to viruses designed to attack neural implants, bacteria that consumed quantum processors, and fungal infections that disrupted entanglement fields. Emperor Vexthal felt his empire dying around him. Reports flooded in from across the galaxy, uprisings on subjugated worlds, fleet defections, entire sectors declaring independence from collective rule. The humans had done more than unite the resistance. They had shattered the psychological foundations that held his empire together. My Emperor, his chief advisor communicated through their quantum link. The outer defense grid has fallen. Enemy ships are advancing on the palace. Perhaps it is time to consider evacuation. No, Vexithul replied, his mental voice carrying the authority of 3 centuries of absolute rule. If the Empire dies, it dies here, with me. Activate the planetary destruction protocol. The order sent ripples of shock through the hive mind. The planetary destruction protocol was the collective's ultimate weapon, a series of antimatter charges buried in Nexus Prime's crust, capable of cracking the planet like an egg. It had never been used, existing only as a deterrent against unthinkable defeat. Marcus felt the change in the battle's rhythm before the sensors detected it. Something was happening on the planet's surface, energy readings that spoke of massive power being channeled toward a single purpose. Elena, we need to accelerate the timeline, he said grimly. They're going to destroy the planet rather than let it fall. Understood, Elena replied, pushing their modified ship to its limits. Jake, I need everything you can give me. The ship plunged through Nexus Prime's atmosphere like a falling star, its hull glowing cherry red from atmospheric friction. Zephyrian fighters swarmed around them, their plasma bolts lighting up the sky, but Elena's piloting skills kept them alive through the deadly gauntlet. Sarah released her final weapon as they descended, a cloud of microscopic machines that would seek out and disable every quantum processor in the palace. The nanobots were her masterpiece, combining human engineering with alien technology to create something that existed at the intersection of biology and quantum mechanics. Palace shields are fluctuating, she reported as the nanobots went to work. I'm reading cascade failures throughout their defensive network. Jake's voice crackled through the comm, nearly drowned out by the sound of straining engines. Jump drive is charging, but I need 12 minutes minimum. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast. Marcus moved to the ship's modified airlock, where he had installed a sniper's nest with a perfect view of the palace's throne room. Through the transparent aluminum window, he could see Emperor Vexthal standing before his command console, his tentacles manipulating controls that would detonate the antimatter charges buried in the planet's core. The shot would be the most difficult of Marcus's career. 2 kilometers through atmospheric interference, targeting a being whose physiology he understood only through Sarah's research, using a weapon that combined technologies from half a dozen different civilizations. The margin for error was essentially 0, but as he lined up the crosshairs on the Emperor's cranial ridge, Marcus thought about Earth. He remembered the blue skies and white clouds, the sound of children playing in parks, the lights of cities at night. He remembered 8 billion souls crying out as they died, their voices joining in one final song of defiance. For Earth, he whispered, and pulled the trigger. The projectile crossed the distance in 1.7 seconds, its path calculated by quantum computers and guided by targeting systems that could track individual atoms. It struck Emperor Vexthal precisely where his quantum implants connected to his organic brain, severing not just his life but his connection to every Zephyrian in the Empire. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. 3 centuries of hive mind unity shattered like glass, leaving millions of Zephyrians suddenly, terrifyingly alone in their own minds. Across the galaxy, collective fleets stopped in mid-maneuver as their crews struggled to comprehend individual thought. Entire worlds fell silent as their populations grappled with the concept of personal identity, but the Emperor had managed to activate the planetary destruction protocol before he died. Deep beneath Nexus Prime's surface, antimatter charges began their countdown sequence. They had 8 minutes before the planet, and everyone on it was vaporized. "Jump drive ready," Jake announced, "but we're cutting it close, 5 minutes to minimum safe distance." Elena threw the ship into a vertical climb, racing against time and physics to escape the planet's gravity well before the charges detonated. Around them, the Liberation fleet was doing the same, their mixed crews working together with desperate efficiency to save as many as possible. Marcus remained at his post, watching through his scope as chaos consumed the palace below. Zephyrian guards stumbled around like lost children, their collective coordination replaced by individual panic. Some threw down their weapons and ran. Others stood motionless, overwhelmed by the weight of sudden self-awareness. "Marcus, we need to go," Elena called from the bridge. 30 seconds to jump." But Marcus had seen something through his scope that changed everything. In the palace's communication center, a lone Zephyrian technician was trying to broadcast a message to the rest of the Empire. If successful, it might restore some semblance of coordination to the collective forces. Without hesitation, Marcus took the shot. The technician fell, his final transmission cut off mid-word. The Liberation fleet jumped to hyperspace just as Nexus Prime's surface began to crack, antimatter fire boiling up from the planet's core. The explosion was visible from neighboring star systems, a brief new star that announced the end of the Zephyrian collective. But the real victory was already spreading across the galaxy in the form of quantum echoes. The death cry of a hive-mind emperor reaching every corner of space. In the aftermath, as Liberation fleets secured former collective territories and newly independent worlds celebrated their freedom, the 4 survivors of Earth found themselves at the center of a transformed galaxy. The war they had started with nothing but grief and determination had grown into something unprecedented, a galactic revolution that freed billions of sentient beings from collective tyranny. 6 months after the fall of Nexus Prime, representatives from 47 species gathered on the neutral world of Haven's Rest to establish what would become known as the Galactic Liberation Alliance. The meeting took place in a simple conference chamber, far removed from the crystalline palaces and hive-mind complexes that had once symbolized authoritarian rule. Marcus stood at the chamber's observation deck, looking out at the diverse crowd of beings who had come together to build something new. Kythera crystal forms stood beside gaseous nebula dwellers, their translucent bodies shimmering with internal light. Vorthan military commanders compared notes with hive-breaker philosophers, while dozens of other species worked together to draft the founding documents of galactic democracy. "Strange how it worked out," Sarah said, joining him at the window. She looked older than her years, the weight of 2 years of biological warfare having taken its toll, but her eyes still held the scientific curiosity that had helped them survive. "We set out for revenge and ended up creating something beautiful." Jake approached from the engineering section, where he had been consulting with alien technicians about establishing secure communication networks that couldn't be hijacked by future hive minds. His red beard was now streaked with gray, but his enthusiasm for solving impossible problems remained unchanged. "The new quantum protocols are fascinating," he said, unable to contain his excitement. "Each species contributes their unique technological perspective, and the combination creates something stronger than the sum of its parts. Kind of like us, really." Elena walked over from the diplomatic section, where she had been helping coordinate supply shipments to newly liberated worlds. The former pilot had discovered a talent for logistics and administration, her military experience proving invaluable in organizing the massive humanitarian effort. "The collective's former slave worlds are struggling with independence," she reported. "Generations of hive mind rule left many species unable to make individual decisions. They're asking for human advisors to help them transition to self-governance." Marcus nodded slowly. "Ironic, the species that nearly went extinct is now teaching the galaxy how to be free. But their victory came with a price that none of them had fully understood at the time. In destroying the Zephyrian hive mind, they had created a power vacuum that various factions were struggling to fill. Former collective military units had gone rogue, turning to piracy and raiding. Some liberated worlds had declared independence only to fall into civil war. The galaxy was free, but freedom was proving to be messy and complicated. "Commander Steele?" a voice called from behind them. They turned to see Ambassador Zix of the Kythera, his crystalline body reflecting the chamber's lights in complex patterns. The Alliance Council requests your presence. There's something you need to see. They followed the ambassador to the Secure Communications Center, where a massive holographic display showed a real-time map of the galaxy. Red markers indicated conflict zones, yellow showed areas of instability, and green marked worlds that had successfully established stable governments. The situation is deteriorating faster than we anticipated, Zix explained, his optical sensors focusing on the display. Without the collective's iron grip, old ethnic and territorial conflicts are resurfacing. Some worlds are requesting reoccupation by stabilizing forces. Admiral Kethvar of the Vorthon Empire stepped forward, his scaled hide bearing the scars of decades of warfare. My fleets are stretched thin trying to maintain peace in 3 different sectors. We need a coordinated response, but the Alliance lacks the authority to impose order. Marcus spent his final years as the memorial's curator, greeting visitors from across the galaxy and telling them about humanity's story. He never married, never had children of his own, but he found a kind of peace in ensuring that Earth's legacy would survive long after its last children were gone. Sarah continued her research until the end, but focused on healing rather than harm. Her final paper, published just weeks before her death, outlined a theoretical framework for using quantum biology to enhance peaceful cooperation between species. She died in her sleep at age 73, her laboratory notes filled with sketches of impossible flowers that might bloom on worlds not yet discovered. Jake lived the longest, his engineering mind keeping him sharp well into his 90s. His final project was a set of automated systems that would maintain the Earth Memorial in perpetuity, ensuring that humanity's story would be told even after its last survivors were gone. He passed away while working at his bench, a half-assembled quantum processor in his hands and a smile on his face. Elena died as she had lived, helping others. She was aboard a relief ship heading to a disaster zone when a reactor malfunction threatened to destroy the vessel. She stayed at her post to coordinate the evacuation, ensuring that everyone else made it to the life pods before the ship was consumed by plasma fire. Her final transmission was characteristically professional. "This is Captain Rodriguez. All personnel evacuated successfully. Elena out." The galaxy mourned their passing, but their legacy lived on in the institutions they had helped build, the freedoms they had won, and the memorial that kept humanity's memory alive. The Earth Memorial became the most visited site in known space, a pilgrimage destination where beings from across the galaxy came to pay their respects to a species that had taught them the true meaning of determination. And sometimes, late at night when the memorial was empty except for the custodial drones, visitors reported hearing faint sounds echoing through the chambers, the ghostly whisper of human voices, singing old songs about freedom and hope and the unbreakable human spirit. The last transmission from Earth had spoken of children and of not going quietly into that dark night. In the end, humanity had kept both promises. They had ensured that future generations would inherit a free galaxy, and they had made their final stand with such defiant courage that death itself had been transformed into victory. The stars that had once burned white above alien thrones now shone down on a galaxy where freedom was not just possible, but inevitable. 4 humans with nothing left to lose had given the universe everything it needed to find hope in the darkness between worlds. Their war was over. Their peace had just begun. Marcus studied the display, his strategic mind already working on the problem. We can't become what we fought against. The moment we start imposing order from above, we become another version of the collective. But we can't let the galaxy burn either, Sarah added. Some of these conflicts involve biological weapons derived from my research. We have a responsibility to help clean up the mess we made. Over the following weeks, they worked tirelessly to establish what became known as the Peace Corps. Voluntary assistance teams composed of veterans from the Liberation War, specialists in conflict resolution, and humanitarian aid workers. Unlike the collective's occupation forces, Peace Corps teams could only operate with the explicit invitation of local governments, and their mandate was to help worlds solve their own problems rather than impose solutions. Marcus found himself leading one of the first Peace Corps missions to a world called Theta Majoris, where former collective administrators were fighting a bloody civil war with liberation forces. The irony wasn't lost on him. The sniper who had started a galactic war was now trying to prevent one. The mission was successful, largely because Marcus understood something that the diplomats had missed. The conflict wasn't really about politics or ideology. It was about fear. The former administrators were terrified of retribution for their collaboration with the collective, while the liberation forces were afraid of losing their hard-won freedom. Fear makes people predictable, Marcus explained to the Peace Corps trainees who had gathered to learn from his experience. But it also makes them dangerous. The key is to understand what they're afraid of and help them find a way past it. Sarah's contribution to the post-war galaxy was perhaps the most complex. Her biological weapons had been instrumental in defeating the collective, but they had also introduced new forms of warfare that could devastate entire species. She spent her remaining years working with Alliance scientists to develop countermeasures and establish protocols for biological warfare prevention. Jake threw himself into the massive project of rebuilding galactic infrastructure without creating the centralized vulnerabilities that had made the collective possible. His designs for distributed communication networks and decentralized defense systems became the foundation for the Alliance's technological architecture. Elena became the Alliance's first director of humanitarian operations, coordinating relief efforts across dozens of war-torn worlds. Her experience as a pilot proved invaluable in understanding the logistics of moving supplies and personnel across interstellar distances. But as the years passed, the four survivors found themselves increasingly isolated by their own legend. They had become symbols of human determination and resilience, mythical figures whose story was told on 1,000 worlds in 100 different ways. The burden of being living legends began to weigh heavily on them. It was Marcus who first expressed what they were all feeling. During a quiet moment at the 10th anniversary celebration of Nexus Prime's fall, he pulled his old friends aside for a private conversation. "We did what we set out to do," he said simply. "Earth has been avenged, the galaxy is free, but I'm tired of being a symbol. I want to be human again." They understood. The war was over, but they had never really allowed themselves to grieve for what they had lost. 8 billion people, an entire world, a civilization's worth of dreams and hopes and possibilities, all destroyed in 6 hours of orbital bombardment. Together, they decided to build something that had never existed before, a memorial to Earth that would serve as both a monument to the dead and a reminder of the cost of tyranny. They chose a location in the former Sol system, where Earth's debris still orbited the sun in a slowly expanding ring of cosmic dust. The Earth Memorial was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Using technology provided by dozens of species, they created a structure that existed partially in normal space and partially in quantum dimensions, allowing it to hold more than its physical size should permit. Inside, they reconstructed pieces of human civilization, art galleries filled with rescued works, libraries containing humanities literature, museums preserving everything from children's toys to scientific instruments. But the heart of the memorial was simpler. A single room, circular, with 8 billion points of light arranged in a perfect sphere. Each light represented one of the lives lost when Earth died, and each one pulsed with the rhythm of a human heartbeat. Visitors could touch the lights and hear recordings of individual voices. Mothers singing lullabies, children laughing, lovers whispering promises, scientists explaining discoveries, artists sharing their visions.